Okay, next we have Cody, you're up with the climate friendly and equitable community efforts.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. So I'm Cody Meyer. I'm a land use transportation planner with DLCD. Know a lot of you from these meetings back in the before times when we were all the COG office. So yeah, just want to give you an update on the climate friendly equitable rulemaking. I feel like most people are kind of aware of what's been happening. It's about 2 years old now, but I'm going to kind of quickly run through just some kind of background stuff just for anyone who doesn't. So apologies to those of you who've seen this presentation like 15 times. So okay, so first off, this is a part of the 4-agency effort, Every Mile Counts, to implement the statewide transportation strategy and the work that we've been doing with DEQ, ODOT, and Department of Energy. And the efforts here are, this is climate friendly equitable communities is one of the many efforts in this multi-agency collaborative, and it's under the local greenhouse gas planning. It's a pretty big multi-pronged effort. So first of all, DLCD is leading it. We're working in close cooperation with ODOT through that partnership of Every Mile Counts. It's making proposed rule amendments to 3 divisions of our administrative rulebook. So housing rules, transportation planning rules, and our metropolitan greenhouse gas reduction targets. So our packets are really big and really dense. There's a lot of about over 100 pages of administrative rule revisions that are going to the commission. Just by way of background, we're only proposing rule amendments for the metropolitan areas of the state. We use this slide every time we talk because we still get incoming mail from Ontario or someone asking us to come out, and why aren't we talking to them? So our greenhouse gas reduction rule targets in Division 44 are set for the metropolitan areas of the state. I don't need to tell you all that this is the biggest bang for the buck. This is like, I think it's 70% now of the state's population. I'm trying to get some updated numbers, but the last I knew it was like 65% of the state's population lives in one of these metropolitan areas. And I think it's close to 70% works there. So a lot of bang for the buck. And we've been really busy. We've been doing this since, technically we've been at every commission meeting since 2019. And we've been doing kind of active work since March of 2020 with the executive order on climate. We spent a lot of time scoping this effort and doing interviews with stakeholders and surveys. We did kind of a very diverse rulemaking advisory committee this time. We have 40 people, and a lot of them are community members with zero knowledge of planning or modeling or administrative rule language and how that connects to their daily lives. So we spent a really significant portion of the rulemaking just trying to kind of build capacity and talk in everyday terms and get to kind of concepts of what folks wanted to see. Then we really bombarded the RAC with detailed draft language. We then kind of went out and talked to the public in workshops and practitioner meetings with our local government partners. I think the last count was we're up to over 140 public facing meetings that we've held all over the state via Zoom or Teams. And we're here in 2022, we're in the adoption phase. We've had our first session, the formal adoption hearings have started. So we're actually in rulemaking now, technically, although we've been doing it for a number of years. So we've had the first public hearing with the commission, got a bunch of feedbacks for revisions, and we'll be going back to them in end of May. So I'll post some information on that in a second. Yeah, in this side, we're working on implementation to try to stand up some of the work or be ready to stand it up. So working closely with ODOT to get funding for the plan amendments that are going to have to happen. DLCD has a budget request that we got some money to do some of the zoning work, the initial zoning work and community engagement planning work for the affected jurisdictions. So we're kind of getting contracts ready to go in a parallel track here. Oh, that was fancy. Yeah, so the charge from our commission was into two categories. So one was require the climate-friendly, equitable land use, transportation, and planning regulations. Those are mostly the TPR. And then two is we had the required planning to meet the targets. And in the TPR, the planning regulations, really just kind of looking at like, how are we doing planning for land use and transportation? We're building on existing rules. We're not making up a lot of stuff from whole cloth. We're just kind of strengthening what was there in large part. And we're looking at taking action immediately or as soon as possible. One of the things we're really running into is trying to work with local partners and trying to be aggressive and ambitious, but also trying to be workable and make it folks able to implement it. So we're really balancing those two needs right now and refining rules based on that feedback. So the rules just previously, I'll just say the TPR has had some issues in the metropolitan areas where it had some unclear direction. It was MPOs, metropolitan areas, cities, counties, local jurisdictions. It was kind of a grab bag of who the regulation applied to. So we are taking a very conscious effort now to say these rules apply to the cities and counties. Some of the rules require them to work regionally, but ultimately it is their responsibility, and that's within the authority of the commission to write planning regulations for those jurisdictions. So the 6 focus areas are the land use planning. Climate friendly areas is the name of what is essentially just trying to get a 30% of zoned capacity for higher dense mixed walkable areas in each jurisdiction. So that's tied to the statewide transportation strategy goal. Looking at high quality bike and pedestrian and transit infrastructure, limiting the minimum off-street parking mandates. So you can still build parking if you own a property, just asking that governments kind of limit the amount that they're asking or making folks build. Limiting the use of motor vehicle congestion standards, and some direction on prioritization and project selection. And then a little bit of stuff on EV charging, which was kind of pared down due to some of the authority issues we ran into. So as I said, the TPR has been around for about 30 years. It's had a lot of direction for coordinated land use and transportation planning. We know we need to do more, so we're building on that foundation. We're really, I think, as a state, a lot better off than some of the other areas in the country who are undertaking this work because we've had growth boundaries, we've had efficiency measures, we've had the TPR. So we're really just trying to build on that strength. Key area of the new rules for transportation planning rules are to really look deeply at modal plans. So there's a series of rules. I think it starts in rule 500 and all the way up to 800 to kind of direct how transportation system plans need to focus in on these different modal elements before doing a combined project list. And really, it's just looking at how do we get to a connected, safe, complete networks for each mode and not kind of focusing in too deeply on any one mode, but we need to have a plan at least to make sure that we're building very safe, connected networks. And then we really have these prioritization frameworks throughout the plans is, you know, we want to make sure we're putting investment in climate friendly areas where we want to see more housing developed there, and we want to see a lot of multimodal infrastructure being built to serve those folks so they don't have to drive a car. We also are trying to make some restorative investment in neighborhoods that have been underserved in the past. And we want to look at, in a TSP, looking to where are the key destinations that folks need to get to in the city. So then you can kind of tie that into those modal access there. So the prioritization framework is really set to say cities and counties are going to have to start looking at selecting project based on their ability to reduce carbon emission, to increase equitable outcomes. And we want to make sure that we're measuring success in a way that is a little bit more broad than I think a lot of cities have done in the past. So kind of not outlawing V over C or LOS, but just saying that folks, you need to take another look at that and say you can use 2 different standards when you're doing land use applications to look at what the impacts are, maybe on V over C, but maybe on the amount of driving that's coming out of a development as well. Our Division 44 greenhouse gas reduction targets have been around for about a little over a decade now. So we didn't do a whole lot of work technically under the hood on these. We basically just rolled out the requirements to say, in the past, Metro had to do the planning to achieve the target as a region. We've rolled that down to the next 2 largest metropolitan areas in the state. So building on Eugene Springfield's plan that they did in 2015 and working with them to create rules to say, like, you can adopt that plan, you have the plan, and to get the missing ingredients to get it adopted locally in their local TSPs or comp plans. And then also to do scenario planning for the Salem-Keizer metropolitan area. So as I mentioned, we're kind of at the 11th hour here. We've had our first public hearing. We got, I think, over 45 pieces of testimony, some of which are like 30 plus pages long with very detailed guidance. So it's kind of like co-writing a research paper with 150 different partners. So we're really going in there and taking all this great input that we're receiving and making amendments and trying to find issues before we go back to the commission in, it'll be May 19th, I believe, will be the adoption hearing. So if they do adopt the rules, the effective date, we're looking at probably late June, somewhere in there, and working with ODOT to get an implementation plan together. You can find that on the commission's website in their March packet, but I think the kind of key actions that we see coming out of the gate first are working with the metropolitan regions and the cities and counties to help them set performance measures and targets for actions to reduce climate emission, and then do some parking reform in a couple different phases. And then we are working diligently on getting the climate friendly area mapping and designation studies, which will happen in 2 phases, but we're working hard on getting the first phase of that up in the next year. So with that, I will turn it to you all to see if there's any questions I can try to answer.
All right, any questions for Cody? That's a lot to cover, so. I don't see any questions yet, Cody. Have you given much thought to what kind of guidance and things you might be working on over the next, probably it'll take some time and be a little bit circular, I'm thinking, but maybe over the next couple of years that might involve some of the OMSC group and crowd?
Well, we're giving a lot of thought to the guidance, and we know that we're going to be working really hard just starting the summer to put that out there. We've got actually a contract. I just saw the sign off on today to have a guidance document put together for the land use planning aspect to guide cities and counties to do the climate friendly area zoning in the study. So that was pretty good to get that up and going. But yeah, that's just a drop in the bucket. We're going to need guidance for all this stuff. So yeah, I think as far as this group, I will be looking to ODOT. I know I've been talking with Tara and folks over there to say, okay, there's a lot of things we got to think about, and I'll be looking to ODOT to try to lead on that effort of like, what are those like modeling guidance. One thing came up through a conversation, I think it was last week, or it's been a running conversation online, is having some peer exchange workshops on sharing some of the stuff, particularly around performance standards and some of the work that Portland is doing, Eugene is doing, based upon the SB 743 VMT reduction law that passed in California a number of years ago, and just looking at different, building on the Metro mobility study, what are the different alternatives that are legally defensible for folks to use. And so I think that that's one that is really on my mind, that I want to make sure we're getting some of that stuff at least talked about in the near term, so we can try to start wrapping our head around what we need to do to support governments.
Yeah, I think that's going to be, it looked like an OMA conversation in a few months around some of that stuff. And I know California does use VC, LOS, et cetera, a lot. It's kind of like Oregon, where you have different contexts. They're using different things and making different types of decisions. So CEQA does their thing with VMT, but for a project to be identified, evaluated, et cetera, they still have a lot of other measures they use, as you can imagine. So I think people get a lot of that stuff mixed up. And one of the things I keep thinking about for this group, and it kind of relates to, man, probably almost, maybe it's been 10 years ago when we were doing the climate smart stuff in Metro, and they were using Envision Tomorrow and some of these other things, is when you start looking at CFAs and some of these different development patterns, how do you decide what demographic to allocate, into these different areas? So that's an area I think would be really good to get some guidance and some thought around, because the demographic piece it's really important, not only as we do more equity analysis, but making sure we're matching those housing things up. And that would be good to get guidance and agreement on what people are doing for the modeling scenarios. So that's an area I think that I would see the OMSC engaging pretty heavily in moving forward.
Yeah, and to that point, I just want to, we're working with Oregon Housing Community Services on this anti-displacement gentrification toolkit, which has we have a mapping tool that we're putting together to support this work that really looks like a lot of demographic data points from the census that kind of heighten your risk of displacement. So that could be, and we're really working with that agency to say, hey, let's try to make sure we're funding affordable housing in good, safe, walkable neighborhoods instead of making them exclusive enclaves. We want to be making sure they're accessible to all. So that could be an interesting tie-in to that.
Yeah, I think that would certainly hopefully all work together. That's where I was thinking that might be a good OMSC topic to bring all the agencies together to say, let's make sure we're kind of at least all on the same playing field there. So great. Okay, Jeffrey, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Brian, and thank you, Cody. Just had a question about the all those public meetings. What was the public's tenor and feelings about all of this? I'm just really curious as to how it's landing with the public out there.
Okay, well, yeah, thanks, Jeffrey. I will say, when we did our workshops regionally in all the regions, we heard just a huge amount of push for more, and just to do more on climate, to do more for housing and transportation choice. Is interesting to hear the kind of different takes from different regions, but I mean, in Southern Oregon, they're like, this is a really scary situation down here with the fires, and the climate is the top of their mind, and the housing crisis down there. And we have gotten pushback, I'll say. There on the other side, you have folks like the home builders or the realtors who, frankly, have a vested financial stake in a certain product that they don't want to see let go. So they're very concerned that, more multifamily housing could affect their bottom line. It's my personal take on that. And you have, some neighborhood associations in Bend engaging and, concerned about having upzoning near their houses. So, but for the most part, I'll say probably like over 90% of the public input we've received is very much supportive, and every local government has submitted testimony that says we're supportive with the outcomes of what the rulemaking is trying to achieve. Though we may have issues with different means to get there, we all want to move to the same, place. We want climate friendly and equitable communities.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Natalie.
Hi, Cody. This is Natalie Lillienwall at ODOT, and I guess your presentation made me think about the Interstate Bridge project and all of the rules that are going in place. How would they affect the traffic modeling, and how soon would the traffic modeling be updated to reflect those changes?
Okay, that's a good question. If there is an acknowledged plan and a project in that plan, I don't think that that should affect the traffic modeling of that project. So, you know, to my mind, it's really looking at, as we make new plan amendments going forward, we're adding, you know, here's what we want to see those look like. So a lot of it is aimed at the systems level.
Okay,
But I mean, if we have like a specific on that, we could definitely sit down with you and Bill Holmstrom from DLCD would probably be the right person to talk about that corner of the rules.
great.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
I guess, yeah, it's a good process question, and I know enough about all those things to be a little dangerous. So maybe the question would be, I think for sort of the legal context, if I understand it right, you would have to go through the process, get those land use changes adopted into the plan, and then we would, you know, figure out how I imagine there's going to be some overlap to try to make some of this streamlined as much as possible, Cody. But then once those are adopted, then they can be used for the transportation system planning efforts, et cetera. So it'll probably, you know, depending on the area and when they make those changes, and it'll be probably a couple of years, Natalie, before I'm guessing you would see that.
Yeah, and I'm just, you know, the general context of the planning system in Oregon is that you do the planning and it's approved, and then it's kind of, you're ready to go, right? It's not, so it's not the development review rule, it's the planning rules to make sure we think about the connections and we put the forethought in there. And then once it's acknowledged and adopted, yeah, so, but if there's a specific, we could definitely follow up with you on that.
Yeah. And that wouldn't, of course, wouldn't impact the Washington side of the interstate bridge project. So,
But you can't build half the bridge.
you could, but all right, great. Any other questions for Cody? You know, it's been a long road, and it's a long road yet to go, I think. So, all right, thanks for.
Well, I appreciate it. And yeah, well, I look forward to circling back and having some more conversations on guidance and stuff with you all.